I remember standing at that table, holding a ceramic bowl of warm soup, my hands completely still even though every part of me was screaming on the inside. The candles were lit. The family was laughing. Christmas music was playing softly from somewhere in the back of the house. And I was smiling. Smiling like everything was fine. Like I was just the humble nun who had come to serve them their holiday meal. But I knew what was in that soup. And I knew that by the time midnight came, nothing in that town would ever be the same again. Before you decide what kind of person I am, I need you to stay with me until the very end of this story. Because what I did that night was either the most unforgivable thing a woman of God could ever do, or it was the only act of mercy left in a town where mercy had already been buried. I am still not sure which one it was. And I think about it every single day. So please, stay with me. To understand why I did it, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to a version of me that would have been horrified by the woman I became. My name is Sister Agnes. I grew up in a small town in rural Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knows your name and your grandmother's name and the color of your front door. I was the youngest of 4 children, raised by a mother who prayed every morning before sunrise and a father who rarely said more than 10 words at dinner but always made sure we were safe. I was not a dramatic child. I was not an angry one. I was quiet, and I loved quietly, and I believed in goodness the way some people believe in gravity. Just completely. Without question. I entered the convent when I was 23 years old. Not because I was running away from something. I want to make that clear. I entered because I genuinely felt called to it. I wanted to serve. I wanted my life to mean something that outlasted me. The convent felt like the most honest place I had ever been. No pretending. No politics. Just prayer, work, and the kind of stillness that makes you feel like you can actually hear yourself think. For almost 15 years, I lived that life peacefully. I taught children in a small parish school. I helped elderly parishioners with their grocery shopping and their doctor appointments. I organized food drives during the holidays. I believed with everything I had that love and patience and prayer could soften even the hardest hearts. I believed that deeply. I really did. And then I was transferred to the town of Grasso Falls. I had never heard of it before my assignment came through. It was a mid-sized town in upstate New York. Nice looking from a distance. Old stone buildings. A beautiful church right in the center of the main square. Decent people, mostly. But there was something underneath the surface of that town that I could feel before I could even name it. A kind of tightness. Like everyone was holding their breath all the time and had simply gotten used to it. It took me about 3 weeks to understand why. The Ferretti family owned Grasso Falls. Not officially, of course. On paper, they were a respected local business family. They owned a restaurant, a construction company, a funeral home, and half the properties on the east side of town. They donated generously to the church. They attended Mass every Sunday in the front row, dressed beautifully, crossing themselves at all the right moments. Dominic Ferretti, the patriarch, always shook my hand after Mass with a warm smile and called me Sister Agnes like he had known me for years. But the businesses were fronts. Everyone in town knew it, and everyone in town said nothing. Because the last person who said something publicly was a city councilman named Gerald Huff, and Gerald Huff disappeared on a Tuesday afternoon and was never seen again. His wife still left the porch light on. I saw it every time I drove past her house. The police chief was on the Ferretti payroll. 2 of the 3 judges in the county had accepted favors they could never repay. The local newspaper editor had received a visit one winter evening that left him with a broken hand and a very clear understanding of what stories he was not allowed to print. Nobody came. Nobody helped. The Ferrettis simply existed above the law the way the sky exists above everything. Unchallenged. Untouchable. I told myself it was not my place. I told myself to pray for them. I told myself that justice belonged to God and not to me. And then I met a girl named Lucia. Lucia was 11 years old and she came to our parish school. She was bright in the way that made your heart hurt, the kind of child who asked questions that adults pretended were too complicated to answer. She had dark eyes and this little laugh that sounded like something musical. She lived with her mother, Rosa, who cleaned houses for several of the wealthier families in town, including the Ferrettis. Rosa had seen things inside that house. I do not know exactly what she saw. She never told me in full detail. But she had started keeping a private record. A notebook. Dates, names, transactions, things she had overheard. She was terrified, but she was also brave in a way that I recognized immediately because it was a very quiet kind of brave. One morning in late November, Lucia did not come to school. I called Rosa. No answer. I went to their apartment. The door was unlocked. The apartment was empty. Clothes still in the drawers. Food still on the counter. Rosa's Bible was open on the kitchen table, like she had set it down for just a moment and intended to come right back. They never came back. The official story from the police was that Rosa had moved out of town suddenly and taken Lucia with her. No investigation. No missing persons report filed properly. Nothing. And when I went to the police station and I sat across from Chief Barlow and I told him that I did not believe that story for a single second, he looked at me with this flat, almost bored expression and said, "Sister, I'd focus on your prayers if I were you." Something broke open inside me that day. I drove back to the convent and I sat in the chapel for 2 hours and I prayed for guidance. And for the first time in my life, I was not sure the answer I was looking for was going to come from above. I felt something else entirely settling into me. Something cold and deliberate. Something I had never felt before. I want to be honest with you. I did not decide to do what I did overnight. It grew slowly. Like something that had been planted in the dark and fed quietly for weeks. I watched the Ferretti family more closely after that. I accepted every invitation to their home, which they extended often because having a nun around made them look pious and unthreatening to outsiders. I served at their events. I smiled at their table. And I watched. I learned that every Christmas Eve, the Ferretti family held a private feast at the main house. Dominic, his 3 sons, his 2 daughters-in-law, and several of their most trusted associates. Around 16 people total. It was a tradition. An annual celebration of everything they had built, everything they had taken, everything they controlled. And they always asked me to help serve the meal. Because it looked good. A nun at the Christmas table. How dangerous could the night possibly be? I am not going to tell you exactly what I used or how I obtained it, because that is not the point of what I am telling you. What I will tell you is that it was not something designed to kill. I need you to hear that clearly. What I had was something that would incapacitate. Severely. Long enough. And it came from someone I trusted, someone who had also lost someone to this family and who had certain knowledge that I did not. I carried it into that house on Christmas Eve in a small glass vial tucked inside the pocket of my habit, and my hands did not shake once. Not because I was fearless, but because I had already made my peace. The house was decorated beautifully. There was a 12-foot tree in the main hall. The smell of pine and roasted meat was everywhere. Children of the extended family ran through the hallways. And Dominic Ferretti greeted me at the door with that warm handshake, that familiar smile, and he said, "Sister Agnes, God bless you for being here." I smiled back and I said, "God bless you too, Dominic." I helped in the kitchen for most of the evening. And then came the moment I had planned for. I was alone with the soup pot for exactly 4 minutes. I have never prayed harder or faster in my entire life than I did during those 4 minutes. My heart was thundering. I heard footsteps once and I went completely still. The footsteps passed. I did what I had come to do. And then I carried the bowl out to the table and I served them. The dinner lasted almost 2 hours. I sat quietly in the corner and I watched them eat and laugh and raise their glasses. At one point, Dominic's eldest son Marco looked at me and said, "Sister, you look pale. Are you feeling all right?" And I said, "Just tired. It's been a long season." He nodded and looked away. By 10 o'clock, people were beginning to feel unwell. By 10:30, the room was in chaos. I was already gone. I had slipped out through the kitchen during the confusion, walked 3 blocks to a car that was waiting, and by midnight I was on a highway heading somewhere that is still not a place I talk about publicly. The Ferretti family survived. All of them. That was the truth and also my intention. What they were not able to survive was the next 72 hours. Because while they were hospitalized, incapacitated, unable to manage or threaten anyone, a federal task force that had been quietly building a case for 2 years finally had the window they needed to move. Documents were seized. Associates who had been too afraid to talk suddenly found the courage. The whole structure collapsed from the inside. Dominic Ferretti was indicted in January. His sons followed within weeks. Chief Barlow resigned. The judge who had covered for them for a decade was removed from the bench. It unraveled. All of it. Like a thread pulled from a sweater. I heard later that Rosa and Lucia had been found. They were alive. Rosa had been threatened and relocated forcibly to keep her quiet. But with the Ferrettis gone, she came forward. Lucia went back to school. I cried when I heard that. I cried for a very long time. As for me, I left the convent. Not because I was forced to. Because I could not honestly continue wearing that habit after what I had done. I still believe in God. I still pray every morning. But I also understand now that I exist in a space that does not have a simple name. I am not a saint. I am not a villain. I am a woman who made a choice in a dark room because no one else was going to. The guilt is real. I will not pretend otherwise. There are nights where I wake up and I can still feel that vial in my pocket and I wonder who I became in that kitchen. And then I think about Lucia's laugh. And Rosa's open Bible on that kitchen table. And Gerald Huff's wife with her porch light still on. And something inside me goes quiet. I am not asking you to call me a hero. I would never ask for that. But I am asking you to sit with this question honestly, the same one I have been sitting with every single day since that Christmas Eve. If you were the only person who could stop something truly evil, and every door that should have been open was locked, and every person who should have helped you had already been silenced, what would you do? What would you actually do? I know what I did. And I have to live with that. Every single morning that I wake up, I live with it. I would really love to know what you think. Leave me a comment below and tell me honestly, do you think I made the right choice? There is no wrong answer here. I just think this is a conversation worth having. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, please share it with someone. Because sometimes the most important stories are the ones that make us ask the hardest questions about ourselves.